Welcome back to the Philosophemes podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Scalambrino. I'm proud to be part of the Evergreen Podcast Network. Thank you for being here. Today, I have the honor and the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Jason M. Pittman. Dr. Pittman is a computational theorist. I've known Dr. Pittman pretty much my entire life. We met in grade school, we played sports together, and it is technically true that my very first copy of Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil came from this man, so I'm very grateful for that. Dr. Pittman and I also co-authored a book together on simulation theory. Dr. Pittman and I spoke for so long, we had so much fun. I retained the entirety of the talk and I split it into 2 episodes.
This episode is brought to you by Google Gemini. With the Gemini app, you can talk live and have a real-time conversation with an AI assistant. It's great for all kinds of things, like if you want to practice for an upcoming interview, ask for advice on things to do in a new city, or brainstorm creative ideas. And by the way, this script was actually read by Gemini. Download the Gemini app for iOS and Android today. Must be 18 plus to use Gemini Live.
The sounds of the season can often sound like this.
So, when are we getting some grandkids?
But with Hilton's Season to Stay sale, they could sound a bit more like this. Or this. Stay and save up to 20% off when you book before January 5th at Hilton.com. Hilton, for the stay. Minimum 2-night stay required. Excludes luxury and all-inclusive properties. Terms and conditions apply.
Talking about the types of simulation in the context of economic, technological, and chemical mediation, that's interesting. Then my NPC theory, post-humanism, and then it was, what question do I want you to ask? So I haven't watched every episode of yours, but I've watched a lot of them.
Sure.
What I might suggest is, this is a unique conversation, one, because we wrote this book together.
Yeah.
And we have a long history of knowing each other. 2, I'm a computational theorist and a computer scientist. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not. I know I lean that way, and it's edgy.
I always accuse you of being a philosopher. Yeah.
And listen, I wish I were. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that's bad.
That's funny. I wish I were a computational scientist. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think maybe there's a lot of uniqueness to this conversation, apart from the book and the topic.
Okay.
Presents to people, because the podcasts I watch, you don't often get 2 people like this sitting down and having a conversation.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah. And I think that I've finally been doing this long enough that I've got a little bit of a better grip on what I'm doing as well. So okay, that I think it's great. Yeah. So I'm all for just firing it up. You know what I mean?
Sure. And
okay.
Listen, dude, for me, there's nothing that's off limits. I'll talk about anything.
Okay.
Ask me whatever you want, dude.
And as needed, of course, I can edit anything out afterward, so it's all good. So,
bro, I go raw. Let's fucking go.
Okay, all right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So, I just finished. I haven't had a chance to put it up yet, but I just finished. There was a murder trial. There was a murder trial. One of the things that was really interesting about the murder trial was that they used the person's Google searches.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the Google searches was, is it okay? I mean, basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but one of the Google searches was, is it okay to kill if the world is fake? Right. So I took that to mean something like, if we're living in a simulation, right? If we're playing Grand Theft Auto, here, I'm going to drop some video game references and whatnot, I guess. But Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I'm always mentioning that to you. But Assassin's Creed Odyssey, if you kill the NPCs, you get warning messages. It's like, hey, don't run around just killing innocent people. But there's plenty of games. I mean, I'm thinking of Saints Row and Grand Theft Auto. Plenty of games where you can just kill anybody you want. There's really no consequences, right? I mean, I guess maybe there's. I'm trying to think of maybe Skyrim or some of these games have karma systems, or maybe they'll send the virtual police after you or whatever. But anyway, I mean, it's an interesting question, especially. And I think it's a legitimate question. They were asking, does this mean that this person's crazy? You know what I mean? I'm like, I don't think it means that this person's crazy. I think it's a legitimate question. If the world is fake, then what sort of rules regarding the world are real? And so I wanted to ask you about that, right? I'll leave it at that. I just put a lot on the table, but anything you want to say in regard to that, and if you just want to launch into your theory of your NPC theory as well, I'd be happy to hear all of that too. So whatever you want to talk about, but yeah.
Oh, dude, we should definitely hit on what you just talked about.
Okay.
Because I'll end up sharing like a personal experience from like when we were in high school. Okay.
Nice. Yeah. I'd love to hear this stuff.
On some like foundational primordial level of what I think ostensibly is a philosophical question is, what is life? And based on how you ascribe a quality to that life, like, we talk about this in AI safety. Like, if you got to pull the plug, is that murder?
Interesting. If you would ask me that question a year ago, I would have said, well, that question is absurd, but now I'm like, well, you know what? This question is becoming more and more non-absurd, it seems. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So we can definitely talk about that, dude. However you want to jump in, man.
Yeah, no, feel free. I'm all ears. I'm ready for you.
All right. So like, I'll share this experience. Man, we were, dude, this is like 90, 91. Street Fighter 2 came out.
Yes.
On
Super
Nintendo.
So funny. Yeah. Yep.
Right. And I remember I had this experience at my parents' house. They were in bed. It was late at night, and I was playing against the computer. And I beat the NPC, and I started crying. This is a true story, dude.
Yeah.
I had this realization that, like, I didn't think the NPC was real, maybe in the context that we'll start developing this idea through, right?
Okay.
But I had this idea that, like, the act itself represented something in an abstract that made me very uncomfortable as a human being.
Interesting. Excuse me. The act of
the violence.
Oh, interesting. Even though it was virtual violence. Right.
And at that point, man, like, dude, nobody was talking about reality being a simulation. That wasn't a concept. Our computation wasn't nearly powerful enough to think about that, in my opinion.
Sure.
And nobody had really come out and talked about simulation theory. And, you didn't have like Bostrom coming out and talking about the probability is not zero, Elon Musk hadn't pontificated. I mean, he was still working in the emerald mine in South Africa. But I had this reaction to that, wherein it made me consider the value of life writ large.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that now is represented in this current conversation of whether or not we live in a computer-generated simulation. Like, if there is a case in which something is not human,
mm-hmm.
then do we afford it the same rights? Now, look, for the history of our species, we've done that with animals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so help me out here, but so this has something to do perhaps with how we define sentience?
I think that's part of it. And then I think part of it is our intrinsic need to position it in some type of hierarchy.
Interesting.
Because like most reasonable human beings will treat other reasonable human beings with some, let's say, decorum or what you'll call respect. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
And then based on our experience with that person or what that person's reputation is, we'll rank them in the hierarchy that we exist in as a society or a group or a small social circle. And we do it with animals. Like, I have a dog and that dog means something to me, but that dog isn't all dogs. And so my neighbor's dog that's an asshole that barks at me isn't as high in the hierarchy of dogs. And neither of them are in the same level in the human hierarchy as you. Right?
Yeah, right.
And so I think intrinsically, we just create this structure in which we place value judgment and then we act accordingly. And I think that's what some people are struggling with, this idea of an NPC in a simulation is, well, To me, the question isn't what is it? I think the question is, how do I interact with it? Does that make
Interesting.
sense?
Okay. Yeah, no, it does. It does. Yeah. So when you say, I'm forgive me, I'm being flooded with all these ideas. This is great. So I've got several questions here that I'd like to ask you, but the one would be, so when you say how I interact with it, are you really talking about prompting, or you're talking about something more than just prompting?
Mm. Dude, that's a really insightful question, because I think that's part of it.
Okay.
Because in this erection of a structure, let's call it an architecture rather than a hierarchy.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
So there's this architecture to the reality that I'm hallucinating in real time, right, through my
Okay.
mind. That's my take, like, on the philosophy of it, being a computer scientist. But that's how computers work, right? I mean, they're generating upstream from the hardware what is a simulation or a pseudo reality for us to interact with.
Okay.
And I think there's an architecture to that in part exists in some fundamental level because of its architecture. It's there. And then our perception of it and our interaction with it drives the construction of it in real time. It's
Mm-hmm.
dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we interact with things, we're positioning them across or within this architecture so that, one, we figure out how to continue to prompt them. That's a really insightful way to think about it. But when you prompt something, it's going to give you feedback. It's going to give you output, which
Mm-hmm.
then is your input to the next prompt.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And to the degree that anybody's interacted with one of the current large language models like ChatGPT, that's exactly how it works. It's iterative by its nature. And it's not just that it's iterative. I'll point out that it's actually recursive. And recursion is a base computational theoretical model. Like, it's at the heart of it. It's all recursive. And so there's input to a system or an architecture.
Mm-hmm.
There's a function that does something with that input to generate output. And that output then is immediately used as input to the same function, and it just recurs you, or
Okay.
it iterates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love the idea of recursion. So all of this takes time, and all of this is somehow materially instantiated.
Yeah.
My question is something like, so as you were saying that, it made me think, especially when you emphasize the word things, it made me think that, right, in a world of things, I suppose, I mean, I don't know that I'm ready to take a position in regard to this one way or the other, but I suppose that it makes sense to say that certain things, even though they are things, deserve some kind of dignity more than other things, which is a strange idea for me. But I guess it's like, well, if you are going to afford some things more dignity than other things, then I guess it makes sense that you would afford AI dignity.
Yeah. Well, like, and so this, I think it's embodied in different ways, Frank. Like, personally, I have a habit. I don't know why. I don't know where it came from, but every time I prompt a large language model, I always end my prompt with comma, please.
Interesting. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's just an artifact of my simulation, as it were.
Wow.
I mean, the large language model doesn't give a shit. It doesn't know. It's not even using that. It's going to tokenize it off and not use it, actually,
Wow.
like in a very technical way. It's not processing that part. But I think that's some instantiated social mores that we have as a society, that's how you deal with things in a certain level of the architecture. Whereas, here's a crazy example I think about sometimes. If you take a rock, and let's say that rock is just like in an open field, there's no trees around or anything like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the morning, the sun rises, it heats the rock, the sun passes, the rock starts to cool down. Fundamentally, that is a computational device, because you can take the heating of it and the cooling of it to process 0 and 1, just like any computational function, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dude, I'm not putting the rock in my architecture as high as ChatGPT.
Right. Right. That's heavy,
But
man. That's
it's at
super heavy.
least
Yeah.
zero, right? It's at least zero. It's still in the hierarchy of things.
Okay. Yeah. Um,
Right?
yeah,
So,
yeah, no, that's heavy. It's heavy.
and I think this is where sometimes, because we've talked for now a couple of years about NPCs, right?
Mhm.
And I think that sometimes where I'm not trying to segue, I'm just throwing this out there to finish it
Yeah,
off.
no, please, wherever. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think sometimes people get this idea that an NPC, like in our book, we have that screenshot of Minecraft
Mhm.
because we based on that documentary where they talked about
Mhm.
Minecraft interacting with NPCs. And I think people get this idea that an NPC is like us in terms of where it's at in that hierarchy.
Okay.
But that's not the only NPC. The NPCs, the chickens, the pigs, the horses, the rocks, the plants, they're all NPCs.
Hmm.
They're just not all at the same position in that architecture.
Man.
Right? Like,
Right.
I don't know how else to think about it. I don't know that I'm right. You know how I am. I don't know that I'm
Yeah.
right. I just don't know how else to think about it.
Well, okay. So, one of the things that this makes me think of, and I feel like I've had this interaction with so many people online, and I'm actually, I mean, I guess in some way this involves morality, but I'm trying to ask this question or trying to make this statement in a way that doesn't involve morality. But I'm actually not sure if that's even possible. But it does seem as though, Jacques Ellul makes these comments about how as things become less sacred, that technology itself becomes sacred. And
Right.
there's this sense in which, I tried to make this point online to some folks. So this, I'm trying to make sure I'm coherent here. This is, I'm bouncing around a little bit, but I'm tracking this. So let me just say, one of the things that I find myself repeatedly engaging with folks about is that if I say something critical or disparaging about AI, they treat it as though I have just offended their friend, right? Like they treat it as though I have just said something, like I've gone out of bounds. Like, oh man, like how could I say something like that? And on the one hand, I think, well, that's kind of silly. But on the other hand, then I think, well, but there is an etiquette and a dignity that's being afforded to this technology because, if I go up to someone, and I was just trying to explain this to somebody on YouTube the other day, that it's like, if I go up to someone and I take their cell phone from them and I throw it on the ground, I smash it on the ground, right? That act is a serious criminal act. And not only is it a serious criminal act, but it's a much more serious criminal act than, I mean, I believe it's a felony. But I mean, given certain contexts, like, I mean, in a certain context, that could be considered domestic violence, right? I mean, like straight up domestic violence. Like, I mean, with a good attorney, they might be trying to push that you're trying to hold somebody hostage, right? So this idea that it's a criminal act to damage somebody's technology. And that would be considered much more so than like if I stepped on their shoe and got the shoe dirty, if I stepped on the shoe and damaged their shoe or something like that. Like regardless of how those acts are defined, there is a sense in which the technology is already being afforded more dignity than these other things. I like the way you put that. I think you nailed it.
Yeah.
So once you so once you see it in that context, then suddenly it's like, okay, well, yeah, I guess you have developed a relationship with and by you, I mean whoever it is I'm talking to, right? You have developed a relationship with your AI assistant. And yes, you have an attachment to your AI assistant. And I guess in some way I have infringed upon that relationship. I have offended that relationship. But, so it's just so strange to me. I mean, it's just strange, but yeah.
Yeah, man. Dude, that's a great point, man. So I think part of that is like, if we observe clinically the advent of parasocial relationships through social media, I think maybe that's part of it. The other part of it too is sometimes, man, it's just so real you can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
Right?
What do you mean by parasocial? Can you help me understand that?
Sure, man. It's fairly common through social media, especially streaming.
Okay.
Where there is an influencer or a popular person that someone is a fan of, and let's say they've donated a non-trivial sum of money to them, they
Okay.
feel like you're my best friend. And now I'm entitled to your
Oh.
attention,
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I
right?
understand what you're
And so
saying now. Yeah.
there's some real social connection in that architecture, even though it's
Mhm.
being 100% mediated by technology. It's not real in the sense that me and you, being childhood friends, have a real relationship because it was in real meat space.
Yeah.
You know, even though you and I are talking virtually right now, the majority of our life we talked person to person in real. I mean, I'm saying real, but you know what I mean, right?
Sure. Right. Right. That was, which reminds me, I would like to record a proper introduction here. I'm sorry. We just kind of stepped
All
right in.
right. Sure, dude.
We just picked back up like we're talking like it's every day. Sorry. We're just like, hey, it's working. Let's go. Right.
Yeah, well, look, to me, man, that to me is what attracts me to these long form dialogues. Is I'm just a
Mhm.
person telling you my ideas. You're telling me your ideas, and we're sharing them with the world. Like,
Yeah.
does it really matter who I am in this architecture, dude? I don't know.
See, I appreciate that, but well, it's fascinating to me. I feel like sitting here and talking with you is it's been I mean even just what we're like 20. I've been sitting here talking to you for 20 minutes, and I'm already like I'm feeling like you become so much more comfortable with the technology, right? Like I'm like, this microphone's almost poking me in the face. I got these headphones on. I got this camera in front of me. I'm trying to figure out where to look. You know what I mean? I got this monitor over here and these lights. And it's just like, but after a while, you just kind of like you just start to like not really even notice that the machine is present. You know?
It's just an appendage.
Yeah. Well, do you think so? And that's it's funny because this is exactly what I was going to ask you. Is that so? Do you think that as people, I mean I sincerely mean this, right? I'm sincerely asking your opinion on this. So, do you think that as people continue to merge with this technology, and I mean that in a non-trivial way, right? I mean like sincerely, like um, the ability to use the AI, whether it be, I mean, I've been following some of these people who are showing, the new evolution of what I'm referring to as the Google glasses, but everybody's got them now. Everybody's got them, right? And so as you start to get a sense, and we talked about this in our book, but as you start to get a sense that I am having an experience in a world that I could not have without this technological mediation, right? Like I am dependent upon this technology in order to have the kind of existence that I am having, I am enjoying, however you want to say it, right? Then is it then the case that suddenly it's like, hey, this power mediating my relation to this life that I live is I have an intimate relation to it, right? I mean, and I have vested interest to protect it, and I have and so
Yeah,
and so on and so forth. Yeah, yeah. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
man, I think that's spot on, to be honest with you. And I think we can observe that in the younger generations.
Mhm.
To wit, I'll give you an example.
Mhm.
Take it for what it's worth, man. It's anecdotal, but it's my experience.
Yeah, I love this.
I have a kid, right? And she's
hmm
10.
hmm
Um,
10
last
years old
summer,
now.
I know,
It's
right? It's
amazing.
crazy.
It's
That's crazy.
amazing.
Uh, this past summer, I took her back to California. First time I'd been back since we moved. And I took her to a conference that was just YouTube, TikTok, Instagram influencers.
Wow.
And a lot of the people she wanted to interact with were influencers from virtual reality games.
Wow.
And what I observed was that generation was so accustomed to interacting with one another through that mediated layer of VR that not only did it inform their behavior, let's say in real life, in meat space,
Yeah.
but the virtual reality was reality for them. Being out in meat space without the goggles on was not reality for them.
That's so heavy. That's so
Yeah.
heavy. So can you give an example of like um I guess like the kind of what I'm hearing, like a kind of awkwardness in relation to meat space or something like that. Oh, and
And we
the
were
tech.
waiting
Can you?
outside like the main conference hall one day
Okay.
so that she could just meet a person and have them sign a t-shirt. And all the people that were there waiting were
Hmm.
all participants in this virtual reality game that my daughter plays.
Okay.
In fact, she recognized some of them. Of course, she's never met them in person. And in VR, you're an avatar, not
Okay.
you, right? As a
Hmm.
mortal coil. But they had like their screen names written on their t-shirts. And she's like, I've played that game with that dude.
Wow.
Okay. And so that's
Hmm.
one, that's how she knew that person.
Hmm. Hmm.
She had never really met the influencer in person, of course. They have YouTube videos, so she knows what the person looks like.
Hmm.
But the interaction amongst not only the, let's say, the group, but the group to the influencer, because
Hmm.
that's parasocial,
Hmm. Hmm.
was entirely driven through the behaviors that happen in the game, not
Wow.
the
Yeah.
behaviors you have out in, let's say, meat space society.
Yeah.
To the point where in meat space society, I don't know what else to call it. You dig what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
I like that. It makes me think of Deleuze. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And because remind me, man, I want to come back to a point about Elul in a second.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, their behavior when it wasn't within that architecture of that game in virtual reality
Hmm.
was just observably different. I'm not value judging it. I don't think it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
bad
Yeah.
or good. You know what I mean? But it
Hmm.
was demonstrably different
Interesting.
to the point where like I'm on the outside of this. I played the game a couple times with her because I'm a dad and like I'm gonna play with you. Okay. Um, to me, it seemed like their behavior outside of that parasocial VR governed reality just was not real. Almost to the point where when they were not participating in that shared VR space, that's when they were NPCs. When they were in the VR space, they were like real.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So real quick, the one thing I wanted to mention about Olul, and maybe this connects some conversation, maybe it goes off on a tangent, we can table it. Man, I've read the Technological Society several times, and in the context of like NPCs, what I realized is that technique is the NPC. Alul's concept of the technique itself is the NPC.
Excellent. Give us some more. Yeah.
Yeah, like, well, I'm not going to suggest that I really understand what he's saying. You know what I mean? Like,
Okay.
it's
Okay.
hard.
Yeah.
Okay. But as a
Hmm.
computer scientist, what I took away from that is I understand the transcendent nature of technique. It's not technology per se.
Okay.
And so it has this instantiation in and of itself as a thing,
Hmm. Hmm.
but it's participating to a degree where it dominates that architecture.
Okay.
And to me, as I started to think about like NPC architecture and the concept of simulated realities, it struck me that no, that's it, man. Like the technique that's pervasive across all those layers is like the abstract NPC that all NPCs are derived from. It's the primordial NPC.
Interesting. So you're saying so. Help me if I'm getting this wrong. But so you're saying something like the set of rules that characterize or they govern how to
Mhm.
interact. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that
So,
yeah.
like in this VR context, there's this. I think the concept of Elul's technique applies
Hmm.
because it's that abstraction of let's call it the golden rule
Okay.
from which all rules derive, and now the
Okay.
architecture is set, and everything
Hmm.
that's instantiated into the simulation abides by that architecture because it has to because it's computational.
That is super heavy. So can I just let me just come out with my bias here, please? Like let me
Yeah,
just say
man.
it right. So I cannot let me put it like I cannot let go of the meat, right? Like I just can't do it. Like I feel like I feel like Kant Aristotle, maybe not Plato actually, but Kant and Aristotle. I just feel like you got the meat. I mean, like the meat is real. The meat is real. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and yeah, and the information is the information depends on the meat.
Yes. Yes, dude. I dig it. Right? Because in computational, I think sometimes, like, sometimes this is where I have a problem with computational theory of mind. Computation is not a computer. A computer is an information processing system. So downstream from the computer is input, is data. Okay.
Mhm.
But that's an embodiment of a theory. The theory being that computation is input to a function that produces output.
Mhm.
And in most cases, this is where things get a little funky with the current generation of AI.
Mhm.
In most cases, that is deterministic. So if I give the same function, the same input, I always get the same output. Always. 2 plus 2 always equals 4. As far as I know, I'm not a physicist, but as far as I know, that's true throughout the entire universe. It's just
Mhm.
baked into the fabric of it. I don't
Mhm.
know anywhere where 2 plus 2 equals 5, no matter what people argue.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
Or like one plus one is 2 with Terrence Howard, right?
It's great.
Yeah, it's just not true, dude. It's just not true. No matter what you argue, observably, it's not true. However, when you start to instantiate or embody the construction of that, then you can have variations. And I think
Okay.
sometimes that's where people start to, in my estimation, think a little wrong about this when you start talking about computer generated realities and NPCs and stuff like that, because they're non-deterministic.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll give you an example to just illustrate the end of that, to not like drop it right off the cliff.
So you're saying that they're adapting.
Not only adapting, but more importantly, what I'm saying is a computational theorist is, if you have a conversation with Chat GPT,
Okay.
and let's say you take the prompt, copy and paste it, and you put it in twice. So it sets the engine up, so to say, right? And
Okay.
then I ask it the exact same question twice. You will not get the same answer twice.
Interesting. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's
And so
stochastic.
say it again.
It's stochastic. It's non-deterministic.
So what does that mean to you? Like
Oh
what is
man, great question. Great question. Okay, so if I wanted to think about what it would take to create a theory, not the practical application,
Mhm.
just the theory of creating a machine that is necessarily powerful to generate a reality, because of the complexity, and it's complexity in uncertainty. So it's chaotic. It has to be, fundamentally, it has to be non-deterministic at some level. I'm not talking about free will determinism. That's a whole other conversation, right? You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm just talking about the computation of it. So a deterministic system will always produce the same output given the same input. I don't think that our reality is like that. I think you can have the same inputs to the same functions and have varying degrees of output. Now, at some level of resolution, maybe it's the same, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, water's not flammable and stuff like that, right? Like, yeah, yeah.
Right, right. But growing up in Ohio, Lake Erie caught on fire twice.
Right. We get the cue smoke on the water, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And that happened because there's complex variables involved. Lake Erie had
Right.
a bunch
Yes.
of trash on
Yes.
it. So it's
Yes.
okay. So you could argue that it's not the water catching on fire, it's the trash.
Oh
But
no,
then
no, no.
why?
your point is right, though. You're right. No, you are right. I understand what you're saying, and you are correct. Yes. Yeah.
Right. And even what I'm digging at too is just the articulation of all those variables, which are not all the variables, to me hints at a complex system operating in high degrees of uncertainty, right? Because the future is not revealed to it. It can't compute forward. It's just producing output.
Okay.
And that takes a non-deterministic system. More to the point, because we'll revolve maybe around NPC ideas a little bit. That also takes a high degree of autonomy when you talk about like autonomous systems.
Okay. So let me see if I can kind of like,
that was a lot.
Okay.
Dude. Yeah,
no, that's super duper stuff, man. I've got one topic with two questions in regard to this one topic. So would you say something like Limitless, the movie Limitless, right? Like this idea of just calculating everything and being able to calculate it so well that you can predict the future, right? I mean, or within a probabilistic, certainty and so forth. Okay. So what I hear you saying is something like limitless is not possible from some sort of God's eye point of view, but from the point of view of an individual, so that's like localized instead of global, right? So like, because globally it's chaos, globally there's too much happening, but from a local point of view, the computation may be possible, but even if the computation is possible from a local point of view, that doesn't mean that the system is completely deterministic. So there's kind of three questions in there. Yeah.
And so this is why, I think it's around the middle part of the book when we start talking about virtual type of simulation. I think that's where I started talking about the ideas, and it really belongs to a field called solar engineering. And that's when you start talking about Dyson spheres and Matryoshka brains. Okay, and so the idea of Dyson.
Thank you. No. So go ahead, please. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say you're going to have to give me some more about that. Yeah, please.
Yeah. I'd love to, man, because I think about this all the time. Because, like most things, and you nailed it, Frank. What level of resolution are we talking about the computation at? Right?
Sure. Well, and what got me so excited a moment ago was that what you show. I thought we were talking about a virtual simulation. You started talking about an actual simulation, and I was like, I didn't see it coming. But this is great. This is great. Yeah.
But this is actually why. Look, if somebody's going to put me in the spot and ask me, look, dude, what do you really think? Because we were very careful throughout that book to not take a position on whether we think it is or is not. We were very intentional about it, and I love that. But if somebody bought me an extra beer and was like, hey, what do you really think? I don't think actual simulation is possible. I just don't think it's computationally possible because of the overhead of the computation.
Interesting.
And I'll explain that, okay? Because it ties it all together.
Okay.
I would suggest that at least virtual type computation is possible. However, you can't do it with the information processing hardware we have available to us today. You could do it at a localized level, which is why those VR experiences work the way they do.
Interesting. Okay.
If you want to scale that up, my idea was that's when you need something like a Dyson sphere. So you're going to take the energy of a star. Okay. So imagine having this device around the sun that you could harvest all the energy out of that sun and use it for computation.
Okay.
And then you have to feed that into a computational directed into information processing system. And that's a Matryoshka brain.
Nice. That's awesome.
But it's happening at the scale of stars or solar system.
I think that's something that people tend to not consider is that you got to power this thing.
Well, because as far as we know, and again, I'm not a physicist, there's a limited amount of energy in the universe.
Yeah, no, that's well said. Yep. There's so many reasons. Yeah, there's so many reasons why actual simulation doesn't work. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And this goes all the way back as a computer scientist to Turing. That was a lot of his idea about the halting problem. Like if you take a Turing machine, which can basically operate on any problem abstractly, and you put that inside of a universal Turing machine, which can operate on universally any problem, that inner machine is still constrained by that computational layer, which means you're consuming resources. I'm making up a number, okay?
Yeah.
Let's say you have 10% overhead. So in an actual simulation, your actual simulated reality would be 10% less real. And I would argue that it's not computationally real. It's diminished by 10% in that example. But you could virtualize it.
Interesting. Yeah.
You can absorb that overhead in the virtual simulation because you don't have to perfectly replicate atom to atom. Hence NPCs. You don't need to I shouldn't say replicate. You don't need to simulate everybody in the real universe. You can inject NPCs in, which take less computational resources.
Wow, that's heavy. That's heavy. Yeah. I think I think that anyone who read our book would get the same ideas that we're on the same page about this. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. And then the mental type, just to finish that thought.
Yeah.
Like that's even more possible to me.
Yeah.
For the same reasons. Because now everything is an NPC, maybe even you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I go back to, I had that realization like on the third reading of Elul, like, no, what he's talking about, man, is the technique, is the abstraction of the architecture. It is the NPC from which all NPCs are generated.
So help me out with this. So
Sure.
you're saying something like this, right? Is that we're talking about mental simulation now, and you're saying something like, if you have a framework that you are using to govern the way in which you navigate mind external reality, or which you navigate meat space, that framework, insofar as that framework has been imposed upon you, right? Whether it be a political, cultural framework, a religious framework, whatever kind of framework, essentially that insofar as you are sort of not mindfully, or in any other way to put it, is that you are mindlessly operating in regard to the programming of that framework.
Right.
You may be an NPC.
Yes, it did. I mean, we call it instinct or intuition. It's a base programming.
It's heavy. That's super heavy. Yeah. Well, okay. So if you're calling it intuition, I'll give you an example. It's clearly the case that the older I get, the more I'm like, well, I'm becoming old. Right? It's just I think that I was just saying to myself the other day, I was listening to Daniel Cormier, and he was talking about the John Jones Stipe Miocic fight, and he was saying that that when you turn 42, and I was thinking of the meaning of life and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and stuff, that when you turn 42, things just start not working the way that they used to work, and I felt like, well, it's too bad somebody didn't tell me that when I was younger. But anyway, so certainly it's the case that I am aware of this. But at the same time, one of the things that I've noticed is that, and I think this is actually highly relevant to what you just said. So, because we're talking about intuition, we're talking about frameworks being imposed upon us, and that somehow sort of governing our intuition of mind external reality. So one of the things that I have noticed is that when I drop things, like if I will, it just doesn't even matter. Like whatever kind of like object I may have in my hand that I drop it, you figure that I have been dropping objects in mind external reality now for, I guess approaching a half century, right? And so the idea is that because I have so many trials of how objects fall in mind external reality, there is some sense in which my body, this is like, what is it, like training a LoRa or something, or what do they call it? Those, you're training these models, just so you get so many reps. You get so many reps, right? So it's like, I've trained this. My body has been trained so many times on how objects fall in meat space that that I find, and this is radical. I mean, and again, I'm not in no way, shape, or form am I bragging, because I mean, I certainly don't move like I used to, but I find that I just am able to catch these objects without even seeing them sometimes. Like I'm not even looking at the object, and my hand just knows where to go because it's like my body is just sort of guessing at where the object's going to fall to. And it shocks me sometimes, because I'm like, I just keep catching these objects, and, it's just like, wow, it's just strange. But I think it goes exactly to what you were saying, is that in some way, all of these reps have trained my intuition, right? And so, yeah.
Well, like, I mean, we have the experience of playing sports together.
Mm-hmm,
And think about the fact that the very first time you threw a football, somebody didn't have to explain to you how to throw the football. They might have explained to you how to throw it better, more accurately.
Interesting.
How to better hit a given target, how to better hit a moving target.
Mm-hmm.
But bro, I would bet, you tell me if I'm wrong, you picked up the ball and threw it, and it went somewhere.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That is complex trigonometry.
Interesting.
And somehow, we're wired up to do it. Now, a part of that is our evolutionary cycle. Is the apex predator on the planet. We're just wired up to compute that. It's one of our advantages over every other life form on the planet.
So heavy. Yeah.
Okay. And so now I'm going to connect a couple ideas real quick.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Because, coming out of our book, listen, man, there was a while, and there's still periods where, like, I'm completely untethered from reality. I don't know what's real anymore, dude.
Nice.
Like, and I've learned to enjoy it. To wit, I think sometimes, especially I think that documentary really inspired us. And what I didn't like about it is and maybe it's my bias, that's fair if somebody wants to tell me that, I felt like there was a consistent negative perception of living in a computer simulation being true. Okay. And I don't accept that. I don't think that's intrinsically obvious nor true. Okay. And so, like, I think about, like, picking up a ball, football, an object, and throwing it, like, and I'm not arguing that we're in a simulation because this is true. Okay. It just boggles my mind that we're able to do that as a creature, as a thing in this architecture. And we're uniquely able to do it. And so I think, okay, to the extent that, let's assume we're in a computer generated simulation, we'll just assume that. Is it bad that part of that simulation is a framework by which we can instantiate throwing things? Like, I don't think it's bad. It made us the dominant species on the planet. Okay.
Yeah, that's super heavy. They're super heavy. Yeah, I'm with you. Okay.
You know what I mean? And so, like, I'm kind of like trying to tie back to this architecture of, this is the other thing I thought about. Like, what I think we did really well was just outlining a logic that was part computer science, part philosophy. So it's very grounded. If somebody wants to figure out for themselves whether or not they're inhabiting a simulation, here's a logic to run through that will help you paint that framework out, right?
Yes.
And I think that's kind of what we're dancing around is we have these questions because we're human beings. It's part of our nature to ask questions. And how do you go about answering it?
Yes. Okay. So forgive me. I don't want to sidetrack you at all. But so is it okay if I say something here?
Yeah, of course, man.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't want to sidetrack you if you're on a heavy thought here. That's like saying, I understand that swimming is swimming, but when you're talking about swimming, as when you start to talk about swimming, you agree with the person up front, certain things about that swimming that you're talking about. So, for example, are we talking about swimming in a pool? How big is the pool? Are we talking about swimming in the ocean? Are we talking about swimming in a lake? Are we talking about swimming in a stream? What are you talking about? Just going through the motions in your backyard? What are we talking about here? And I feel like this is one of the really valuable things about our book is that it shows people how important it is to keep in mind that if I start a conversation with you about the swimming pool, and then you say to me, like, yeah, well, there you could always go over to the ladder and climb out of the swimming pool, and I say, well, you can't do that in the ocean. Right. And then you say, yeah, well, we're not talking about the ocean. We're talking about the swimming pool. It's just like when I feel like so much of this AI, so much of this simulation conversation at a philosophical level functions like that. Right. So it's like, they want to say, well, there's the I always want to say mandala, but it's the Mandela effect. There's the Mandela effect, and some of that stuff is creepy. I mean, it's creepy. Like the mamas and the papas. I mean, my dad used to listen to the mamas and the papas. I feel like, yeah, I don't think that's the song I was listening to when I was a kid. I don't think that's true. It seems like maybe something has happened, and the Ed McMahon stuff. I mean, I believe the Ed McMahon stuff. I mean, it's like, I swear I saw Ed McMahon doing Publisher Clearinghouse stuff. I swear it. The Monopoly stuff. It's just like I played Monopoly as a kid. I know that the monocle was on that dude's face. But the problem is that they don't want to keep straight whether we're talking about an actual or a virtual or a mental simulation. And I feel like the thing that they keep forgetting is that we are thinking about this. We are thinking about this right now, right? We are talking about this right now. And so therefore, it's just like if we were thinking or talking about anything, like there has to be some sort of coherent context that we're talking about. Like I can't just suddenly, be like, well, and that's why I take the leash with me when I walk my dog. It becomes absurd. Like we don't know what we're talking about anymore. You know what I mean? Like there's a tree out back. It's really pretty. What? Yeah.
No, I think you're spot on, dude. Because like, for me, I always thought about him, and this is another part of our architecture that I really loved, and it's probably the one thing, honestly, that kept me sane. Okay,
Nice.
is we had that idea of levels of resolution.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And all of the architecture of our artifacts relates back to fundamentally some base reality. It assumes
Yes.
there is some base reality.
Yes.
That may not be the one you're experiencing at some level of resolution, given some type in the structure.
Well said. Yes.
And I think that's where some people that talk about simulation theory get a little twisted, in that they lose track of whatever level, whatever type of simulation we're in, assuming we're in one. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We may not be. We may be in base reality. A lot of people forget that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about a way to figure that out in the book, which we'll get to maybe in a little bit. But they forget that regardless of what type and level of resolution you're in, there is a base reality that's governing it. That sets up all the constraints for the computation. And I'm
100%. 100%. 100%. Yep.
The simulation you're in cannot be greater than base reality. It at best is a one-to-one map of it, which because of the computational overhead, I don't think is realistic. Yes. So it's at least less than.
Yes.
How much less than? And then how crazy can it get depending on the non-determinism of it, right? And what I love about what you just said, man, is like, I can walk my dog different than you walk your dog because the system is non-deterministic. Mm-hmm. If it was deterministic, we would all walk our dogs the exact same way because it's determined computationally. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The input is walking the dog, so to speak. I'm oversimplifying. And the output is walking the dog.
Yes.
And that's to say also, I think the one thing, and the documentary kind of hit on this a little bit, because there was good stuff in that documentary.
Yeah.
But what it hit on in some places was an oversimplification of what it would take for a simulation to actually exist.
Okay.
My dominant memory of the butterfly effect is the Berenstain Bears books. And that's because my mother was a librarian, so I was around books all the time.
That's right.
And listen, man, I don't remember it the way that it is now. I remember it a different way.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's because of my accumulated non-deterministic experience in whatever reality I'm in, or if base reality was altered, which then altered the simulation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so no, it's super heavy. It's super heavy. So, the reason that I bring this up is because you know, it seems like, and this is why I think that the work that we put in is so valuable, is that it seems like folks don't know where to go when they have these ideas, right? And it's like, well, yeah, it's like, well, there is some structure to the thinking of this, and so therefore, it's good to understand that structure so that you can recognize when you go out of bounds and when you don't go out of bounds, right? Because even I mean, as you're saying these things, and I'm thinking like, well, this idea of an actual simulation doesn't make sense in the context of what you're saying, because in the context of what we're saying, because you have Ed McMahon who can say, I never did that. You know what I mean? So it seems to suggest, that, I think that keeping straight what type of simulation it is, like making sure that you agree up front, this is the ontology that we take to be, that we are supposing is real, and now we're going to work on that ontology. Because the problem is that otherwise, it's like we're talking about swimming in a swimming pool, and then suddenly I'm talking about swimming in the ocean. Like, you got to watch out for the riptide, and you're like, there are no riptides in swimming pools, and I'm like, yeah, but there are in the ocean, and then you're like, okay, well, I thought we were talking about swimming pools. You know what I mean? So right, so you got to, I think that's the value of our book, really, in a deep sense.
Spot on, dude. I think, all credit to you for coming up with the primordial architecture of the structure of the artifacts.
I appreciate you saying that.
That's the brilliance of the work, dude. It really is, honestly. And that's
we did it together. I feel like we did it together. I would not have been able to do it without you. There's no two ways about it. Right?
And I have it in my notes. I don't know if you remember, in an early version of our conversations, we didn't call them artifacts. We called them anchors. And the idea is it was an anchor to anchor the discussion so that you didn't lose track of what you were talking about.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Right? Because
and then suddenly we were like, oh, this is, yeah.
I'm being honest, for me, when I was writing my parts of the various chapters, it got slippery sometimes. Like, I don't know what level of resolution or what type I'm actually talking about here. And so I got to go back to the anchor or the artifact to ground myself so that this idea gets expressed in a cogent manner. Dude, that was difficult sometimes. And Sorry, real quick.
No. Yeah.
The deeper we got into the architecture towards the mental type, it got slippier. I mean, it was just like, bro.
Yeah. Right. Well, this is why. I always say, people say, well, what is the value of philosophy? And I'm like, I'm not so sure that there is a ton of value to philosophy, but I will say that there is one thing that I would say is the value to philosophy. And I was just having this conversation with Molly. Every time I have a conversation with somebody about what is the value of philosophy, I personally always say the greatest value of philosophy is that it teaches you how to make contact with reality. And I think that's kind of it, And so it's like, well, I feel like, there's a lot of people out there who might want to take this out of context and skew it, but I just feel like, especially, it's like when you're studying philosophy early, it's like things just become so confusing and everything's just kind of smashed together, and you're just sort of like, well, that's a neat idea, and that's a neat idea, and wow, I am really confused, right? But I think that at some point when the light comes on, then suddenly you're just like, oh, okay, well, we're in this context now. Oh, okay, now we're in this context. Oh, now we're in this context. And I think in a sense that's exactly what's happening with these simulation theorists. These folks are talking about simulation, and it's like, well, no one had come out and said, hey, these are the contexts, right? Like these are the contexts that you could be talking about. And so it makes sense. Yeah.
Let me offer a refinement. You tell me if you think I'm off base here.
Yeah, please do.
To add to that, I think for me as a non-philosopher, the power of philosophy is exactly what you said. And I'm going to add to it now, the ability to ask iteratively more powerful questions about an idea.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Like zooming in. Yeah.
Yeah. You are the chief witch finder. You're the
Interesting.
interrogator. And there's nobody better positioned for it, man.
Well, they need to pay us more money.
Amen. No, I'm on board with that.
I'll find all the witches they want. Yeah. But yeah, that's great. It's great.
Well, but in some abstract way, that's really what we're talking about, though, right? Like,
I appreciate you saying that. Yeah. And I think you're right.
If we're going to suss this out, dude, you're hunting witches.
No, I think you're right. Yeah.
And that takes a very specific skill set to understand what the idea is, which is a vast oversimplification of what you said. And my refinement is not only understanding it, but then understanding how to ask questions of it, not about it, of it.
Sure. Okay. Well, so I guess so in a sense, what I think we just said also is something like,
The sounds of the season can often sound like this.
So, when are we getting some grandkids?
But with Hilton's season to stay sale, they could sound a bit more like this. Or this. Stay and save up to 20% off when you book before January 5th at Hilton.com. Hilton, for the stay. Minimum 2-night stay required. Excludes luxury and all-inclusive properties. Terms and conditions apply.
So it makes sense that these younger generations would relate to a simulation as though it is base reality. But there is this deep sense in which if you understand the simulation as simulation, then you already recognize that, that an actual simulation, or the idea that what we're taking to be base reality is a simulation, that it just doesn't work, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think in part that's true. And again, going back to like my personal anecdotal experience with my kid. And part of that is, and now part of is she's 10, so she doesn't think this way, right? But even when she's older, I would suspect, because of her development in her culture,
Mm-hmm.
she doesn't have necessarily an appreciation of the computational constraints. So she won't be able to understand that an actual isn't necessarily possible. Now, my assumption is we're in a closed universe, right? That 2 + 2 always makes 4. I don't know that's true. I'm assuming it's true based on what we know. It may not be true somewhere, right? Like I'm making something up and I'm speaking out of house, but I recognize it as speculatively possible. Inside of a black hole, maybe 2 + 2 = 5. Maybe it equals 3. I don't fucking know. I've never been inside of a black hole. Nobody has.
Mm-hmm.
We just know physics breaks down inside that. That generation, because of the way their entire existence is mediated by technology, all of it.
Yeah.
I don't know that they know how to question it, which is the power of philosophy.
Interesting. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So this leads me. May I ask a question here? So I think we're at something of a crossroads, but it's still on track here. So this ties back into something you had said a little bit earlier. I feel like, and in all fairness, I feel like it could be because I spent so much time just constantly reading student papers, right? So just like you're just always reading, 57 people writing about the exact same topic, and there's a range of how much work they've put in terms of actually doing the reading and actually listening during the lectures, actually thinking about it on their own. So in that range, I mean, the semester is only so long, and so therefore, there are clear constraints, right? There are clear limits to these things, and so you can compute the ranges, pretty intuitively. I mean, I guess in the sense I'm just looking at it like, well, nobody shows up and explains the Critique of Pure Reason to me in Introduction to Philosophy, right? And so anybody who does show up and explains the Critique of Pure Reason to you in philosophy, they're probably getting some help somewhere, right? Okay, so I think that I understand that I may be, an anomaly to a certain extent because of this, but because of all the reps again, right? The training of my, it's not a Laura. I keep wanting to say training my Laura, but it's not a Laura. But anyway, but but I feel as though I can very quickly recognize that this was produced by AI. Right?
Yes. Agreed.
And
100%.
yeah, especially like long form writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked this guy the other day, I understand now. So this guy has his own podcast, and his podcast is very political, and I think that I think that he doesn't like Aristotle. Let's put it that way. This guy doesn't like Aristotle, so he's not going to like me, I guess. But which is unfortunate because he likes a lot of other things and that I also like, and I feel like at some point he's going to realize that Aristotle is not his enemy. Aristotle is very much there to help him. But in either case, so I said to this person. I'm assuming that this is a real person, but I said to this person online, I said, hey, it's interesting to me that AI, when you ask AI a question about these books, right? Because, and I'm being 100% sincere with you when I say this. I think that maybe people think that I'm messing around or that like I'm loading up or something, but I'm not. Like I'm being 100% sincere. Is that AI is coming back with answers that are wrong. I mean, they're asking AI these philosophical questions, and it's coming back with wrong answers. And I can absolutely articulate a coherent argument to show you. I can point to primary sources and show you that AI is wrong, right? That these AI answers are wrong, right? So I said, it's interesting to me that AI doesn't cite primary sources. If you ask AI a question about, for example, Nietzsche, AI doesn't say, well, Nietzsche said this, Nietzsche said this, Nietzsche said this, and therefore I think that Nietzsche meant this, right? AI doesn't do that, right? AI just kind of says, hey, here's the answer. And so I said, well, it's interesting that AI doesn't cite primary sources. And this guy says, well, it will if you ask it. I said, all right, fire it up. Let's go. So he asks it, hey, cite the primary sources. AI goes in and says, it basically says something like, well, Nietzsche said this, and so therefore, and then it derives the same conclusion it just derived, right, earlier. And so it made me initially think that maybe there's some kind of a disconnect between it doesn't understand the value of citing primary sources yet, right? But at the same time, this idea that, it just doesn't seem like it is reasoning from primary sources to its conclusion. It seems like it's weighing, right? It seems like it's weighing data. It's weighing data.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah. So anyway, so I feel like. So here's my ultimate question for you, but I feel like it's noticeable. It's noticeable when an answer is produced by AI. I think that it still has it has a clear rhetoric to it that is discernible. On the surface, you can just immediately sort of see it and be like, oh, that's an AI answer. But my question is something like this. So my question is, on the one hand, I maybe didn't initially want to believe this, but I'm leaning in this direction now, and that is that it may be the case eventually that AI will learn so much, right? It's just like just training these models, right? It may be the case. I'm actually starting to be persuaded that it may be the case that AI could get to a point at which it would be able to control its rhetoric so much, you would be able to train it what to do with primary sources, that suddenly it would be able to produce these stylistic answers that actually make it appear as though it's not AI, right? Mm-hmm. So here's the ultimate question, it was your comments about computation and a closed universe that actually led me to want to ask you this. Is that, so I guess my question is something like this: is that, like, do you see, in terms of computation, do you see? I'm sorry, this is such a hard question for me to articulate, but it's like,
you good, dude.
Yeah, but it's like, and I feel like you've been speaking to this to a certain extent, but it's like, so do you see that? I think you've actually been answering this question all along, but is there just one right answer, and that once you teach AI that answer, then it just won't matter anymore, right? Like it's just,
Yeah.
does that make sense? I don't know
Oh
if
yeah, it does,
if I'm
dude. It's
asking that question.
heavy. It's heavy. Well, check this out,
Mhm.
dude. Very good question. So 100% agreed. Not only, and so this is dictated because for people that are watching and listening,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
I interact with AI on a daily basis.
Mhm.
And so
Nice.
not only can I tell when a student is using it, I can tell you what fucking model they're using
Nice.
because of how
Nice.
much I interact with it myself. And I see those, let's call them ticks,
Okay. Yeah.
right? Or patterns.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Your description in simple terms of how the model actually functions is spot on. It's not reasoning. The frontier is reasoning systems. They exist.
Okay.
Um, they're not online yet in a general way, but they're supremely powerful because they can reason.
Okay.
Okay. But let's put that aside because it's not here yet. So like if somebody goes, I can tell when a student writes something using the free version of ChatGPT versus the subscription. And
Wow.
then with the subscription, I can tell which model they're on because you have
Okay.
choices. Okay. And that's because I have a subscription and I've interacted with all those models enough to be like, I recognize that. Just
Yeah.
like I can recognize you from another friend when you speak or write.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Okay. That's a
we
great
all have
analogy.
that
Yeah.
tick.
Yeah.
Okay. Across that, there's this abstraction of a lack of reasoning. Okay.
Okay.
Now, the current models are very good about not hallucinating like the public free models or the older models. The older models were horrible. They would just completely synthetically generate references. They weren't
Interesting.
even real. Right. And so that's one of the first things I check when I spot like you have too many commas and you're using these couple words too much. I know that's in the free model. Let me go check your reference. And it's completely fabricated. That's because
Wow.
the technical term is an hallucination. It's
Yeah,
just
that's what I was going to ask you. So that's what you mean by the AI is hallucinating. Wow. Yeah.
correct.
Oh
Correct. That's
man,
the
that is
technical
heavy.
articulation of that. That's what's happening. The let's say private, meaning you have to have a subscription to them. Cutting edge models available right now really don't hallucinate too much. They're
Wow.
pretty
Okay.
accurate. They're
Okay.
pretty accurate. Okay. But there's still ticks to them where you can tell it's like generated. Here's something to think about because now we're talking about training because this all takes training. Okay. And training
Mhm.
is very expensive. Very expensive. I mean, like in economic terms, it's billions of dollars to train a model.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. There's massive effects. If you talk about like sustainability and green energy, the power that's consumed to train a version of a model is massive.
Okay.
Okay. Takes data.
hmm hmm
Dude, we're close to running out of data.
I believe that. I believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's why the field now has started to consider, and this has been going on for some time now, how do we, let's say, appropriately generate synthetic data to train these models on because we don't have real data anymore. We've run out.
They should do the same thing that they do with DNA. That when they're you
Okay.
only have so much DNA to test. But forgive me. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right, dude.
Yeah. No,
So
this
check
this
this
is really
out.
interesting.
Check this
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I was running the other day, man, and I was like on a 10-mile run, so I got tons of time to think.
Nice.
And one of the things that occurred to me was, and I've done this, I've generated synthetic data to train a model on because there was no real data available. Okay.
Well, okay. At some
Go
point,
ahead.
I'd like to hear. I don't know what that means. What do you mean by synthetic data? Like, can you give me an example of that?
Sure. Absolutely. And so a tried and true technique. Let's say I can't get the data I need for reasons. It doesn't matter. Maybe it's classified. Maybe there's like PII in it, personal
Oh,
information,
okay.
health
Oh, okay.
information.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't get the data.
hmm
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the features, age, sex, ethnicity, Okay, those are features. Let's call them columns in a spreadsheet.
Okay.
And I know those exist, but I can't get the values. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use an algorithm, like a Monte Carlo simulation. And I'm going to generate what is probabilistically most accurate across like a normal distribution statistically. And I'm going to synthetically generate that data set. That's
Nice.
synthetic data.
Okay.
Okay, so check this out. I pointed out to simulation because it ties this back in. One of the
Nice.
things I started to think about within the last week is increasingly we're forced to train AI models on synthetic data because there's just no more data. Okay,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
sidestep. If you want to decrease hallucinations,
Mhm.
thus
Mhm.
in a linear relationship, increase the power of the model, that takes proportionally more data. You cannot use the same data that you already used to train it. You need more new data.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. And so
Interesting. Yeah.
if you've run out of data, you have to synthetically generate it. And
Okay.
so one of the things I've been thinking about over the last couple of weeks is, let's say I'm at the edge and I have model version 5, whatever.
Okay.
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 And to get to 6, there's no more data. So it's entirely synthetically generated. Is that not a virtual simulation?
Oh, interesting. Interesting. So you're producing a virtual simulation in order to train the simulation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And the AI is living inside of it, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
That's
that
heavy.
is the AI's reality.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. Wow. There are so
Dude,
many
and to be
implications about
fair,
that. Yeah. Yeah.
to be fair, our book perfectly describes that.
Nice. Nice.
Right? People
Nice.
think about simulation, they think about people and NPCs. They don't
Yeah.
think about like NPCs and NPCs.
Yeah. Yeah. That's outstanding. That's
We did.
outstanding.
To be
Yeah.
honest, we did. It's in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's outstanding. Wow. Nice.
Ever heard of Stoicism? Chances are, if you have, you've heard of Stoicism with a lowercase s and not Stoicism with an uppercase S. Lone wolves, no emotions, antisocial behavior, cold indifference. All that is Stoicism with a lowercase s. Stoicism with an uppercase S is the ancient Greek philosophy and virtue ethics framework that centers on service to the cosmopolis, to include your family, friends, community, and planet, and the development of a good moral character. My name is Tanner Campbell, and I'm the host of Practical Stoicism, a 3 times a week podcast teaching Stoic principles and concepts to anyone interested through the exploration of texts and deep dives into various moral topics. You can find Practical Stoicism where you're already listening to podcasts by searching for Practical Stoicism or by going to stoicismpod.com. I invite you to give it a listen today. You just might like it.
This is Mark.
And this is Wes,
We'd like to tell you about Close Reads.
a philosophy podcast where we comment on philosophy texts in real time.
We give you the experience of reading very difficult verbiage without you having to actually do that,
We cover the big names and the figures you've always wanted to know more about.
and share our insights from 15 years running the Partially Examined Life podcast, downloaded over 50 million times
Join us.
on Close Reads.